So this right here in this box, still sealed, is my favorite audio recorder of all time, and I'm so excited. How do I know it's my favorite audio recorder of all time if I haven't even opened it yet? Because it's a sequel to the one that I've been using for almost 2 years now. And I am so stoked for the upgrades that they've made that I had to order it as soon as it was available on B&H. I didn't even wait to hear back if I could get a review sample. That's how much I'm stoked on this. So I will still have my first one for sale because I need to recoup some of that money back. Let's jump in right after a word from this video's sponsor.
The Mod Mic Wireless can boldly go where no mic has gone before. This microphone can attach to any headphones, requires no additional wires, features very low latency, a dual capsule microphone, 12-hour battery life, and LED indicators on the receiver so you know when you're muted and or when the battery is running low. And you can basically run your entire house without ever losing a signal. What more could you ask for? Learn more by clicking the link in the video description.
So this right here is the SoundDevices MixPre-3 Mark II. This is a sequel to a sound recorder that I borrowed a review. I don't know that I've ever actually reviewed this. I was supposed to. I borrowed a review unit for a couple months to see if I wanted to use it for my OBS master class, which I shot in the fall of 2017. And I loved it so much that after like a first week, I immediately emailed them. I was like, hey, you got a discount code or something? I need this. And then I immediately switched to it from my Tascam DR40, which I'd been using since about 2014 prior to that. The Tascam was great, but the preamps weren't exactly what I wanted for the higher end shotgun mics that I was using. That was about when I switched to my Sennheiser MKH416 that I have now. Also, kind of gotten for that course. And it was just not super reliable, and the batteries that it used were a little weird and things like that. So the MixPre-3 was what I really wanted. It's got much better preamps, it's got much better power options, even if the stuff that they charge for is a little redonkulous. And it can support up to 3 inputs as well as 2 different outputs, and it can work as an audio interface for your computer, not just an audio recorder in the box. So if you're confused what this is in the first place, this is a field audio recorder. A recorder that takes your microphone inputs, usually multiple, and records them on the fly into a SD card. Specifically, this can go up to, I believe, 96 kilohertz. Actually, this one can do more. The first one can do 96 kilohertz at 24-bit, a completely uncompressed wave, which can get up to like 6 megabits or something per second or something ridiculous like that. Like my longer recordings, the audio for it is like 6 gigabytes sometimes. It's pretty awesome, but all saved into a multi-track. So I can do like a single track for mic 1, a single track for mic 2, a mixed track, things like that. And that is how I've done a lot of my microphone comparisons in the past, is I hook them all up to this, record them at the same time, and then have them separately that I can edit and switch between on the fly in the video itself, which has been super handy. Plus it has, again, a very high quality preamp that powers my good microphones, makes me sound nice and awesome and sexy, and has been super reliable. This thing's a workhorse. I've had it strapped to my microphone stand running day in and day out for every video. Like I said, since fall 2017. It's been awesome, and you can barely tell that I've used it. So it is meant to be used for that. Now, you may be asking, why would you not record audio in camera? And for a lot of cameras, that is an option, like especially the cinema camera I'm using right now. One of the advantages is it does have XLR jacks on board, although mine broke and I just got my camera back from a RMA where they had to fix the XLR jacks, but they do have that on board. And so when I'm doing like on, I do some video shoots for other people that I don't consider, as important if the audio gets a little lower quality because the preamps in the camera aren't quite as good, then I can record on the fly without needing extra hardware. But typically you want a redundant audio solution, a 2-system audio where you have audio recording both in camera and in a recorder. So if something happens to the camera audio, you have a backup. If something happens to the back, the recorder audio, because that's usually a higher quality, you may still have the scratch audio on camera. I'm still working on making this work with this specific setup, and this is actually going to help with that a little bit. But that's the general idea. I actually have a video in the works that I probably scripted back in spring 2018 to go along with my 5 reasons you need a video recorder. It was 5 reasons you need an audio recorder, and I've yet to even shoot that, nevertheless put it out this many months later, so I'm getting to that. This is the sequel to it. So there are two things that this adds over the original MixPre-3 that I am specifically excited for. And there may be more, because there is a lot to this audio interface, and this is part of why I've put off the review for 2 years now, is because there's so much to this recorder. Because again, it's a recorder, it's a mixer, it's an audio interface, it can do all of these different things, and I use it for one job. I use it as a dedicated standalone audio recorder for my video shoots. That is it. That is all I wanted to do for it. I haven't even really touched it as an audio interface or anything like that, and it is really hard for me to like divert from my normal production schedule and use of it in order to, you know, test it out for that video. So this is kind of supplementing the review I was going to make. If you want more information on all of that other stuff, I highly recommend you check out Curtis Judd's YouTube channel. He has a whole channel dedicated to lighting and audio design for videography and has covered these interfaces really in depth, and there's no point in me making videos when, you know, it would be pointless for me to make a lesser video than what he's already made on it. I will have them linked in the description. But two things that the MixPre-3 II, which we're gonna go ahead and start opening up here, adds over the first one. I've not opened this yet, I'm so stoked. They also ship it really well. Like that form of like wrapping has been my most favorite the whole time. I feel like this packaging is different than the first one I got. But this comes with a power brick with international adapters, because it is USB Type-C, but it needs a lot of power. And then it comes with a standard USB-C to C cable. So that is really cool, because again, it can be used as an interface. Real quick, as a nerdy moment, I really appreciate this kind of packaging. It is like shrink wrapped in there so that there's really no way it's going to move, but then you just kind of flatten the cardboard and open it up, and it slides right out. Super simple, super awesome. So the two things, like I said, I'm breaking the seal. Ah, I'm Jordy. Anyway, this will look physically almost 100% identical. Ooh, that's nice. This will look almost 100% identical to the first one that I have, and in the B-roll you'll probably be really confused as to which is which. The two things that this adds over the first one that I have, I promise I'll stop saying that now, is 32-bit float recording, which is massive, and I'll talk about that in a moment, and timecode generation, not just timecode sync. So we're gonna start with the timecode sync because that's the easiest to explain. So when you're syncing up multiple cameras or multiple cameras in audio devices, you can do that a couple different ways, specifically, especially in your video editor. In Premiere or in DaVinci Resolve, I can go in and say sync based on waveform, and it will analyze the actual audio waveforms generated and try to sync them up based on that. So that's why I clap at the beginning of a video, or sometimes have a clapper, so that it has a sync point. And if that fails, then I have a point where I can fairly easily, you know, line it up myself. However, that's a little inaccurate at times, and there is sometimes sub-frame syncing issues, because typically your video editor works on a frame-by-frame basis, and both of them have workarounds for this, but sometimes your audio is synced up not at a specific frame point, it's in between, and it can be hard to sync that up, and it can be a subtle difference. You would think that little subtle tiny amount of delay between your audio and your video would not be noticeable, but people have noticed in comments sometimes, and it's really annoying. And sometimes there's like audio drift and things like that that can be hard to account for. Now, the second way of syncing up audio that is much more commonly used in especially multicam scenarios, but in, you know, more professional industry scenes, is timecode, where you have a device that generates a running clock that then is output to all of your devices, so your audio recorder and your camera are locked to that clock, and then you can tell your video editor to read that timecode, and it hard locks everything to that clock that was generated. And then it's virtually impossible for it to come out of sync unless you're going for like days on end and the timecode needs reset or something. Well, the problem is devices that generate timecode, even the budget ones like the Timecode Sync, are like $500 at minimum to get started, and probably closer to like $750 to get everything that I would want. And that's pretty not accessible for me, I'll say that. I could not justify the cost as much as it may have been a convenience factor. However, for a device that costs only a little bit more than that, $649 on sale on B&H is what I paid for this. The new one generates timecode. The old one only accepted timecode, so you still needed a third device which output timecode to both my camera and to the audio recorder. This one now generates timecode, which I can then send to my camera, and both of these will be in sync permanently. It outputs it via the stereo out. I have a cable coming, that's the stereo to BNC connector for timecode generation on my camera, and I'm good to go. Will make my life a lot easier for syncing up audio because, especially given that I have USB playback devices, my playback audio is not always in sync, and so I'm never entirely sure if things are perfectly in sync. This basically guarantees it. The second thing which I mentioned is 32-bit float recording. So audio recorders or audio in general has different bit depths, which are used for, it's sort of like the resolution of audio, but not really. You have typically everything's on your computer is typically 16-bit, but if you have a higher quality audio recorder, 24-bit is definitely the way to go. 32-bit isn't about quality so much anymore as it is levels. So your audio editors like Adobe Audition or Audacity typically operate in 32-bit float mode, meaning that in Audition, if I were to crank up a compressor or a gain and blow out the audio, that's non-destructive. That information is not lost. I can still bring it back down and not have it clipped or peaked or distorted past the 0 dB marker. I can bring all that back because it's operating in a non-destructive way. Your audio recorders typically can't do that. Once you clip in the recording, that's pretty much gone. And that applies to 24-bit and back. 32-bit float makes even setting gain and levels in the first place virtually irrelevant. It operates in that floating point mode, which means that no matter what, it is near impossible to actually clip the recording itself. You can clip your microphone. There is a sound pressure level limit that all microphones can go to, and that's ridiculously high, where you can eventually clip the analog hardware before you even get to the recording, but it's virtually impossible to clip that. And for the most part, you can just be lazy and not worry about setting proper levels in the first place. It almost seems kind of silly for an audio recorder to have this because you still have your mixing levels and your faders and things like that. And it seems kind of pointless to have those when I can just record it in free floating 32-bit mode. But obviously this is designed to be used in any mode that you want, so you still need those functionality. But I am super stoked to finally try 32 point because with this, like there is a fine balance, especially when I live in a not super sound treated environment. My AC is always kicking on because it's freaking hot in the summer. This light next to me generates fan noise, things like that. There's a fine balance between getting just enough gain going that this microphone is powered enough for me to sound good and quiet enough that it's not clipping at, when I start talking super loudly, but the background fan noise isn't as picked up. This makes that so much easier to deal with. And I believe also Curtis Judd has a whole video talking about this and testing it out with one of the Zoom recorders, I believe was the first to launch with 32-bit. So I am super stoked to finally get to use it. And it will be a nice upgrade over my current MixPre-3. So in terms of the device itself, it is a small field audio recorder. This one is designed to be 3 inputs, 2 output, 2 bus output. It's small enough to go in a little audio bag if you would like, or it has 1/4-20 taps on both sides so you can mount it up on tripod plates, things like that. I use these little impact magic arms and clamps to keep them secured on my microphone stand at the moment. But this one, since I'm sending timecode to my camera, I'm gonna have to mount it on my actual camera rig itself. So that's gonna change my mounting scenario a little bit. So in the front, you have a big, nice LCD display, play, stop, and record buttons, faders for your different inputs, which you can set to volume levels or actual gain levels or things like that. You can completely configure the multi-track array and what each of the knobs do, things like that. On one side, you have microphone input 1 and 2, XLR jacks. You have the stereo out, which can just be an audio preview or timecode, which is what I'm using here. You have 2 different USBs. One can be USB, it's type A for plugging in a drive to record to or copy your files to or something like that. And you have USB type C, which can be data out for an audio interface or for charging it. You have an on-off switch, which is really hard to get to when the USB-C is plugged in. They have not changed that. It's been an annoyance with my current MixPre-3 is. Once I have USB-C in here, it's very hard to get my finger in where the on switch is. Over on the other side, you have a headphone out jack, an aux mic in jack in case you need to plug in a 3.5mm audio source. I have used this for using that binaural microphone that I record with every once in a blue moon, the little ASMR microphone. That's only 3.5mm, so I plug that in there. You have a control dial for the menus and for headphone volume and things like that. And they have also added, it clicks in as well, they've also added this really nice rubber wheel around it, which can totally pull off. It looks identical to a Lego tire, if I'm being honest. But it makes it a lot easier to use. So I'm glad to see that they threw that on there. XLR input number 3, which competes with the 3.5mm jack, whichever one you use is number 3. And then timecode in via micro HDMI if you're jamming it from something else, and you'd have to buy an adapter for that. we're not using that. We're using timecode generation in the recorder. Back is the battery sled and also where your SD card goes. This thing is obnoxious. This is a 4 AA tray. It eats through AA batteries really quickly, and I quickly stopped using this. And I had originally gotten, which again was a little expensive given that it's a piece of plastic mostly, an adapter to use Sony NP-F style batteries because I have a lot of those for all of my lights and stuff, which gave it ridiculously long battery life. But trying to pull this clamp off to get to my SD card, like it did not want to come off, and I was bending my fingernails back and stuff trying to get it to unclamp. It may have just been the one that I was molded without good tolerances or something, but that got a little obnoxious and of course made the device a lot heavier. And so I've since switched to using a USB battery bank that just stays on top of it and lasts for weeks before I have to charge it since I'm not recording 24/7. You then have an Allen wrench to adjust some of the, pieces of the thing, a little, I don't really know what this is for. This is a little screw that goes in the top that I think is supposed to help stop it from rotating on certain clamps or tripod heads. Sticks in there with a little magnet. And then you have your SDXC card slot. All right, let's get the tutorial side of this out of the way. This is fairly simple. I'm gonna make it super quick. Like I said, I believe Curtis Judd has a much better overall tutorial for this device. Obviously connect your power and your XLR for your microphone. Turn on your power source and flip on the device with the little on-off switch right there. Takes a second to boot up. We're gonna make it dark so you can see the screen here. Now you're presented with the main recorder. You've obviously got pause, stop, and record buttons. You have your individual faders for your 3 inputs, but it is a touchscreen. This tiny thing is a touchscreen, so you can touch it to view the different multi-track recording modes. You can see the file name, the running time code that is running, and then you have these 3 bars to actually adjust options. And then you tap them, you can adjust headphone options, you can set up preset settings. I don't really mess with that much. Same thing with projects. You can start a new project that affects file naming and sorting and things like that. Inputs, you have whether your aux in is line, timecode, camera, or mic. You have your MSD code mix, don't mess with that. Setup's just gonna tell you to press in the game knob. Your outputs, then you can control your headphone outputs and your line outputs, things like that. If you tap where the 3 dots are for the menu, you can go to different ones. So now we have a record tone, recording settings overall, so sample rate, left and right gain, bit depth. This is how you set up 32-bit float. So it's originally set to 24 by default. I set it to 32, and then it has to restart the device. You can set a pre-roll record time, so it's always recording a buffer, and then when you hit record, it is recording up to whatever that buffer is. And the MixPre-3 can only do 2 seconds in 32-bit float mode, but in 24-bit, I believe it can go up to 10 seconds. They did increase it. Remix is an option for you to be able to adjust your gains and your levels in the 32-bit float mode in the device and still output another WAV file for it to give to a client or someone so they don't freak out thinking that it's all clipped and distorted. It's a really cool new feature. And record bells. So timecode, you have it set by default to free run, which is what I leave it on, so that way it's always generating and then you can jam it into your camera. I have a BNC to 3.5mm cable for that. You have recording run, so as soon as you hit recording, it starts generating. Jam it from another aux in, running the time of day, another aux in, or HDMI timecode in, or just turning it off altogether. I leave it on free run. Then you can change the frame rate. Unfortunately, this only goes up to 30. You have a few different options for 24, 29, 97, and 30 at no drop frames and drop frames. That's the only options you get, so that is kind of unfortunate. And you have a couple other options. You can edit your SD card, format it if desired. I don't even have one plugged in at the moment. Set up USB drive. So I don't actually have the option to use that right now or one plugged in because you have to use a different power source other than the USB-C power, which is what I'm using. But it does have a really cool feature where you can plug in a USB flash drive and then it will automatically record anything you record to the SD card as a backup to the flash drive. System gives you options for what your USB mode is on. Mine was actually on audio instead of power only. By default, you're going to be in the basic mode. So you come over here to mode and change it to advanced so you can get a lot of these settings. USB mode normal, stereo out, that's for audio. File transfer to the flash drive. Wingman password, it does have a Bluetooth application that you can use to control it. I have not messed with it much. You can set the date and time. I should actually probably do that. Update firmwares, things like that. Oh, the date and time is set correctly. Nice. So if you want to customize your mic levels and gains, you then press in on the fader assigned to that microphone, so mic 1. Then you have options for gaining, panning, whether it's armed for recording, low cut filter, muting it outright, and whether or not it has phantom power. So for all of my condenser shotgun microphones, I need it to be set to phantom power. So I need to turn that on. You can control phasing, linking with other devices, and you can change whether the input is off on a microphone or a line in level. So it is a mic level signal. And then when you're ready to go, you just hit record. There's no SD card, so it's not gonna record anything, but you record. You can hit record again to pause it, but that does not stop it. You need to hit stop in order to stop the recording. That is a mistake I made quite a bit when I was first starting out. It does, of course, have a little battery indicator. However, when you're using a USB battery bank, it doesn't have that information, but if you're using the NPF batteries or AA's or something like that, it will use that as well. All right, so here I have an example file recorded with the MixPre-3 II that was recorded in the 32-bit float mode. I also recorded it in 192 kilohertz, so you can see here for a 1-minute file, we're looking at a little over 200 megs. It's about 30 megabits per second. So just so you get an idea of the file sizes if you're going all the way in all of the formatting. You can, of course, do 32-bit float with only 48 kilohertz and, whatever. So that is an option to you. So if I drag it in here, you see we have a few different tracks laid out here. I'm gonna go ahead and extract this to mono so that it's easier to work with so that we can see what's going on. And this is just a sample recording I did to kind of accentuate the advantage of this file. So I'm talking normally here. Recording in 32-bit float mode, 192 kilohertz. Talking a little loudly. If I come back here and start talking more conversationally, I'm recording a... And then I decided to start yelling into the microphone. I wanted to get all the different levels that one might encounter during a video. If I get right up on the microphone and start doing some radio announcements. Now what's interesting here is since it interprets it based on the 0 dB, maximum by default, you can actually hear it clipping and peaking because that's what the final file would be. So it's trying to represent that. So when I play this right up on the microphone, you can hear that little crunchiness where it's actually peaking at 0 dB. And then I did some clapping as well. And all of that is peaking, and then even hear what I'm talking. And if I just want to start yelling really heckin'. So, typically with, the first generation MixPre-3 or other audio recorders or my digital setup here, that file's trash. That part of the file is gonna be clipped forever. But with the 32-bit float, it's actually recording every possible value basically. And so while it's clipped here, all I have to do is turn down the amplification. And all of those levels come back. It feels like magic. Like this feels like an over-exaggeration. But the fact that that information is still there, it's like extra dynamic range on a camera sensor. Like you can blow out the highlights and then still pull it back and it's still there. It's kind of like that. It's like recording in RAW on a camera, but it's RAW audio. It's a weird concept. But now if I play it back, if I get right up on the microphone and start doing some radio announcements, you pretty much lose all sense of that distortion or clipping little crunchiness. As a result, it's awesome. Like this is a lifesaver. And frankly, I think we're gonna reach a point very quickly that for most professional shoots, especially more run and gunny kind of documentary, wedding videographer, YouTuber kind of setups where the standard is going to be this 32-bit float mode and people aren't going to want anything else because of how much value this offers. So now if I play back you can see here, well here. Just want to start yelling really heckin' loud. I can turn that down as well. Just want to start yelling really heckin' loud. I was genuinely yelling. So that one the first one I got right up on top of the microphone. This time I'm yelling loud. And then I clapped. I clapped as hard as I could and right up against the microphone. You can even see I'm plosiving the microphone. That's not a verb. I'm causing plosives with my claps into the microphone. That's how loud I'm clapping. It is way up there. But if we bring it down, we had to go all the way to like minus 33 dB. So, play it back. Other than the plosives, it just sounds like I'm going like that. That was minus 33 dB. That was from the 0 dB range. It reached all the way up to 33 dB, and I was able to pull that back. And we could go even, further, but that was the loudest I could really generate a sound. but that's how much range and flexibility you have. And so you still want the right amount of initial gain setting with your microphone, which I'll show you how to do it first, because you still want to make sure it's getting the right preamp quality to really get it boosted. So your gain still matters, but your actual levels don't really matter so much. And so set your gain and then set your levels where you want them to be, but then don't stress out too much if you start seeing it hit the red, because at least one of your channels is going to be, you know, if you're recording in a 32-bit float, then you can recover all of that. And that makes compression a lot easier too, because you can manually bring all this down and then apply a compressor, and you've got the yelling segments and the normal talking segments at relatively the same volume levels, so that your ears, your viewers' ears, don't get fatigued. Pretty freaking cool. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Gearhead, my mini review / preview of the SoundDevices MixPre-3 and MixPre-3 Mark II. I am super stoked for this thing. I jumped on this as soon as I saw it was announced, because this only was announced like 3 days ago, because I am so stoked for the timecode and for the 32-point bit float, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. I'm going to let you get out of here. Thanks so much for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe for more tech education and gear reviews. Check out the playlist of my other gear reviews linked in the description down below. Come check us out on Floatplane, where you can get early access to videos, behind the scenes content, things like that. Product affiliate links on B&H will be here in the description below as always. I'm EposVox. I'll see you next time.